Hello there, and welcome to the third episode of Sandbox. Brought to you by Buro Happold, this is the podcast that asks the big questions about the very future of planet Earth. I'm Andy Duncan. This time, we're discussing energy and the future thereof. Humans need energy to power our lives, but, and here's the rub, our choices of energy are propelling our world into dangerous orbits. However, humans have only relied on fossil fuels for a very short time. Until the Industrial Revolution, our primary energy resources were precisely the kind of thing we're trying to harness now, like wind and water. The clock is ticking for humanity to reboot our approach to energy. But what approach, or approaches, should we be taking? What attitudes do we need to change? What is happening right now? And how can we be doing it better? What can we learn from the past? And indeed, could the answers even lie in the futuristic fantasies of the sci-fi writers of yesteryear? Here to help me answer these questions and a whole lot more besides are two of our very own Buro Happold experts. We have Maddie McTaggart. Maddie, hello.
Hi, I'm Maddie McTaggart. I'm Associate Director in our energy team, and I'm leading our Net Zero Campus service offer. I've been working on various decarbonisation projects, including retrofit, district heating, and large-scale master plans, and I'm very happy to be here today discussing this very exciting topic.
It's very lovely to have you with us, and I'll now go over to Ben Jones. Hello there, Ben. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Andy. Also happy to be here. Also an Associate Director at Buro Happold. So I've been in the buildings environment industry for about 15 years, half of which was as a mechanical building services engineer, and the recent half at Buro Happold leading our, first of all, sustainability offer from Manchester and now our energy offer from Manchester. So yeah, all things decarbonisation.
Fantastic. What an important job. And our very special guest joining us for this episode is Professor Iwan Morus. Iwan is the author of a number of books on science and culture, including How the Victorians Took Us to the Moon. He is Professor of History at Aberystwyth University and a frequent contributor to radio and TV programmes on science and its history, as well as podcasts such as You're Dead to Me and History Hit. Welcome, Iwan.
Thanks very much. I'm very excited to be here. I think we're going to have a great conversation.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining me today. So let's get stuck in, shall we? Now, normally, at the outset of each podcast, I like to play devil's advocate. But even I can't bring myself to say, fossil fuels, what's the problem? Obviously, they are a problem. How have we got here, panel? I'm going to go first of all to Iwan.
Well, as you said in your introduction, human dependence on fossil fuels is relatively recent. It's only really during the course of from around about the 18th century, 19th century onwards, that increasingly industrial culture became more and more dependent on coal. It was coal that fueled the Industrial Revolution. It was coal increasingly that powered the British Empire and allowed for the expansion of the British Empire. And the empire's rulers were very aware of that fact. They were very aware of the relationship between physical power, if you like, energy, the stuff that we burn, and political power. They needed sources of energy. They needed all that nice, lovely black coal from the South Wales coalfields in order to expand, in order to keep the empire running. We were increasingly fantasizing, if you like, about what do we do when the coal runs out. Electricity was very often their answer. Of course, as it turned out, there was oil that powered the 20th century, third or fourth or fifth industrial revolution. And it's that focus on single sources of energy, really, that I think to a large degree has brought us to the interesting place we're at now.
That's a fascinating idea, actually, that we tend to think of the Industrial Revolution. You're there talking about there being 3, 4 or 5. That's absolutely fascinating. And I'll be honest, not a point I've ever considered before. Ben, you're obviously very invested in this topic. What are your thoughts about how we've got to the point we are today?
We depended on coal, and the coal drove our industrial revolution, and we have a Victorian national grid, if you like, today, and a gas grid that we've been building for the best part of 100 years. So we've now got, I guess, less than 30 years in order to redesign that into something that moves us away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. That is the big challenge, isn't it? And I think, as we said, coal fueled the Industrial Revolution, and the UK and the US I guess, benefited from that. And then it moved to oil in the Middle East, and the Middle East have benefited from that. And perhaps the next generation is looking at the minerals that we're going to use for our electric vehicles and the materials we're going to use to build our solar panels and our wind turbines is the next great revolution.
Well, that brings me rather perfectly, Ben, onto my next question, which is currently only 40% of electricity is produced from renewables. Based on current predictions as well, the best case scenario for the planet is 50 to 100 years. What are we doing right now and how are things changing? Is hydrogen the answer? And if not, what is?
I think the answer is not one source of energy. It is going to be a combination of sources and technologies that is going to get us to where we are planning to get to in 50 to 100 years. We're going to need solar, we're going to need wind and hydrogen to some extent. And for each industry, different kind of resources will be needed. Current review of where we are against our targets, it shows significant investment needed for wind power to feed into our electricity infrastructure. We need solar. We need to target our transport, which hydrogen will play a big role in there. So the answer is mixed of resources to get us where we need to get to. What we shouldn't forget is we need minerals to produce the technologies that we need for the renewable energy. And these minerals are in the regions that are underdeveloped and they require energy to be extracted, require significant energy and water to be extracted. And we should not forget the social impact of that mining.
Sure. Absolutely. So we're looking at a combination of energy options. So instead of a gas board and electricity board, it's almost like a smorgasbord of energy. Ben, if there are indeed issues around mineral mining, what other options might there be? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, mineral mining is largely attached to batteries. And I think whether we like it or not, batteries, particularly for electric vehicles, are possibly certainly the only way we could move away from internal combustion engine in cars. So I guess I would say the mineral production, there's more than enough minerals to charge this energy transition. I'd say it's just got to be governed properly, and that social value impact on those communities has to be measured and protected. So you could compare it to the early days of chocolate or coffee production, where there are communities that were exploited, which are now protected. So I think over time, the governance will be there to protect those communities, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost like a fair trade accreditation kind of a thing, perhaps. Looking at these potential alternatives, but what if we think maybe if not so much blue sky, but even beyond the blue sky and into space and beyond? I am particularly excited to have you on the show because you've talked at length in books such as How the Victorians Took Us to the Moon and your online article, Fueling the Future, about the prescience of previous generations. And I'm particularly fascinated by the Nostradamus-like foresight early science fiction writers had in terms of inventing the future, to borrow one of your own phrases. So what really jumps out at you from sci-fi from the past that's proved to be prescient, and what sci-fi that's being written now is perhaps a hopeful future for us from the energy front, Iwan?
One of the really striking things about looking at as a 19th century ideas about the future, and it's during the 19th century that people start thinking about the future in the way that we routinely think about the future, as a destination that we're going to get to through the deployment of new technologies, through the deployment of new sources of energy. The 19th century, of course, it's the century of steam, it's the century of coal. But at the same time, it's astonishing how quickly 19th century commentators start imagining different kinds of future energies. Within about a decade of the Rainhill trials, for example, when Stephenson's rocket established the future of steam locomotion, you've had people say, oh, no, steam's old hat. The future is going to be electrical, trying to figure out better ways of producing electricity, trying to figure out how to make viable economic electromagnetic locomotives, things like that. They're fantasizing about what other sources of energy are there. And it's very much a kind of imperial fantasy. How will the British carry on their world domination? Or increasingly, how might America increase its world domination? There's a really fascinating piece of science fiction, as we would call it, published in 1894 by John Jacob Astor, A Journey in Other Worlds, which kind of fantasizes about a world that's entirely dominated by electricity. He has this fantasy there'll be a windmill on every house, rivers will be dammed, there'll be mills to generate electricity in all sorts of ways. It's a kind of vision that seems to us, obviously, wow, fantastic. They were thinking about renewable energy at the end of the 19th century. I think it's important to remember that they weren't actually thinking about renewable energy. What people like Astor were thinking about, why they were so keen on electricity as the future's energy, was that this was going to be infinite. This was going to be indefinite. You could produce as much electricity as you like without there being the kinds of limitation that were increasingly clear in the case of things like coal. You have people like Robert Heinlein with his kind of future history series, imagining sources of power, what we would now think of as kind of solar panels, really, which provide, again, indefinite amounts of energy to fuel this future. If history teaches us anything, I think it teaches us that's not necessarily the good way to think about energetic futures, because one size doesn't fit all, really, I think, when it comes to equitable provision of enough energy for everybody.
Thank you very much, Iwan. And Maddie and Ben, in very much the here and the now, what about Buro Happold? What projects are you involved with that are perhaps informing the way that we think about fuel and our future?
It's interesting listening to Iwan and all those future projections and how confident can we be today that our answers are right. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? But I can say with some confidence that I think the general viewpoint now is to electrify as much as you possibly can. And there are some things which you won't be able to electrify: industry, steel making, glass making, aviation are a bit further away. In terms of electrification, one project that kind of springs to mind, I guess, is the Community Heat project. So that's a kind of innovative demonstrator, if you like, to look at an off-gas grid community. It was in Barkham in Sussex. And we did a piece in combination with UKPN, who own all the electrical infrastructure in that region, most of London, and Avesco, who are a community energy organisation. And it was basically to take that community of housing and say, how could we fully electrify that and remove it from oil? So it was quite an interesting kind of digital twin we created of that town, and effectively looking at a whole gamut of things, from upgrading the fabric to putting in heat pumps to PV, solar panels to wind, and basically modelling that to show that it could happen. And it's kind of also to demonstrate that kind of community-led approach as well, because it's very difficult, if you take a row of houses, terraced houses, for example, if they're going to all do things individually, it's going to happen very gradually and very piecemeal. And there's actually real benefit and economy of scale to a whole community doing a thing together and doing an energy, kind of taking the energy transition into their own hands and owning that asset. Because if you sat a community, which is what we were kind of looking at, if you sat a community next to the experts, next to the engineers, next to the guys that own the infrastructure, and help them get the funding and help them with the technical aspects of the job, you could actually save them money, you could give them energy security, you could pull that community together. So there's a whole bunch of benefits and co-benefits to having an approach like that.
That's an absolutely fascinating idea, Ben. And what's going on in Barkham? Is that something that's going to be explored elsewhere?
It's kind of a demonstrator. I think Barkham were a nice kind of case study because they were a nice size and they're kind of off the gas grid, so you can kind of draw a line around that community quite easily. And the community were engaged, so they were asked whether they want to participate in that as an exercise. And there was plenty of positive feedback. Some people weren't interested or didn't want to get involved. That's fine. But there was a lot of people that were interested. And it gains momentum then if you get a lot of people on board. So yeah, that's absolutely a kind of demonstrator of how you could do it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ben. Maddie, I know that we've talked before about smart local energy systems up in North Wales. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So just looking at whole system approach when we are solving these community issues, looking at various projects that could join up and bring value and benefit to that community, which could be jobs, could be lower energy bill, also decarbonizing, upgrading their current system. So we worked on a number of kind of local projects, looking at various aspects of bringing these projects, such as introducing a new ground source heat pump could feed the school during the day and then pick up the peak heat from a leisure centre and possibly extend to the social housing. If we have got enough roof space, can we put more PV there to feed the ground source heat pump, and then create a private wire which could benefit the locals from cheaper electricity. So bringing that kind of whole system thinking and creating a project could benefit which could benefit the community. It was at the heart of this project, and we are creating these kind of various models to be able to tackle these diverse set of projects, or I don't want to say issues, but it's a diverse set of kind of challenges that we have to be able to get to our targets. So there is not one model that's going to fit all our challenges. We have to work with lots of different stakeholders to be able to solve these issues.
It seems to me from learning all about the history of energy use is that we need to be flexible and varied in our thinking, given that, we've relied heavily on oil in the past, coal in the past. So it sounds like that's a very, very sensible way to go about things for the future. And just when we talk about Buro Happold, infrastructure, can clean energy be incorporated into all infrastructure affordably? And what about retrofitting as well as new build? I'd be fascinated to know your thoughts on that. I'll go to Maddie again first for this one, please.
We are looking at different solutions for different types of buildings and infrastructure. We've got historic kind of nature of various areas in London that they need tackling. It is very challenging to introduce new infrastructure there, but we can look at options such as a low carbon district heating could feed these buildings, and the policy changes has made huge difference in new build markets. They are very, very low carbon, low energy, and that is great. And again, there are so many solutions for these problems, and that's why we need innovation, creativity, resilience, and bringing everyone around the table to be able to solve these problems. Otherwise, there's not one linear kind of route that we can take.
Maddie, you mentioned PV just a moment ago. Would you mind just explaining what PV is, please, for ignoramuses like me?
Absolutely. Solar photovoltaic. So there are the panels that we put on top of our roofs, which generate electricity. And there are different ways of utilizing that electricity. For example, in my house, we've got 9 solar panels, which if you're not using it, it feeds into the grid. So the grid gets the green energy. But what I have done is utilizing that energy to heat up the water as a priority and then use it. And if not, I'll give it back to the grid. So solar panels are the PVs.
That must be an incredibly satisfying thing. I've got a friend who's just got solar panels and they're obsessed. They've got an app that shows them how much energy they're using. And it's like staring at a lava lamp. They're obsessed with it. That's a fascinating thing. Ben, over to you. Can clean energy be incorporated into infrastructure affordably? Retrofitting versus new build. I'd love your thoughts on those subjects, please.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I think. Can we do it? And I guess most importantly, can we do it affordably? I think at the end of the day, it's going to cost a lot of money and it has to be paid for, but it can absolutely be done. I think we need to think about more around what's the cost if we weren't to do it? What's the cost if we were to continue as we do today? What is the cost on communities and livelihoods across the globe? So yes, we can do it. And we need to generate twice as much electricity as we do today in order to get there. And in order to go for our electrify everything scenario, and the renewables will have to be around 4 times the capacity of what they are today. So that's the challenge ahead of us. It will cost money, but it's something that as a society and as a species, we're kind of behind and wanting to solve that question. I think it's a matter of when rather than if we have to do it, really. I guess in terms of retrofit versus new build, I guess there's a huge amount of infrastructure upgrade that we'll need to, as we said at the beginning of the show, we've got a Victorian infrastructure, particularly electrically, that will have a huge investment required in order to upgrade it to get those kind of electrical capacities we're talking about. That's one of the larger challenges, and also storage. So hydrogen. Well, there's relatively almost no storage on the grid today, so it's huge investment required in storage to make the wind and the solar work when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. So those are probably the key challenges, I would say, in terms of the transition that we need to make.
Thank you, Ben. And moving on, we tend to think that visionaries hold the key to progress and solution. But what can we mere mortals be doing as individuals? And how could we work as communities together or alongside official bodies to move that needle on the dial? Obviously, Barkham is a great example of a community, but what can we as individuals be doing?
I think this is something we inherited from the Victorians. This notion, this myth, really, that innovation is the product of individual genius. People like Nikola Tesla at the end of the 19th century portraying themselves as these kind of idiosyncratic, asocial disruptors who are going to change the way that the world was, and everybody needed to sort of go through them towards the future. And in a lot of ways, that's very much where we tend to think about innovation now, but it has to involve disruption, it has to involve radical change. So it's actually really good to hear both Ben and Maddie talking about the need to embed new technologies in communities, to work together collectively. Because the reality is that the myth always was a myth. It takes huge collective effort to energize the world. And to do that successfully in the future, I mean, we have to organize together. We have to think seriously about what different communities' energy needs are, how that can be achieved in ways that work for them, as opposed to ways that work for self-identified disruptors, so to speak. We incentivize ourselves to do things rather than imagine that, oh yes, it's somebody else's job. Some other great innovator is going to come along and solve the future for us. Well, they're not. It's not in their capacity to do that. We can only create equitable energy futures ourselves for ourselves.
You even see it with the washing up in an office. If everyone assumes that somebody else will do it, nobody will do it. Maddie, what are your thoughts on the individual's responsibility to the future of our planet when it comes to energy usage?
I think we all need to educate ourselves better to understand the difference that we can make to change the course, and that needs collective effort from everyone. I invested in a heat pump instead of a boiler. It was a choice which was very hard and financially difficult, but it was a priority because I understand the difference that it makes. And when we look at where we are, compare where we need to be, individual heat pump uptake in UK is about 1% currently, which we need to be 10% by 2030. And I don't think there is enough information or support around these topics. Same as your friend, when they started using their solar panel and seeing the benefit is similar. When I saw how much less energy I'm actually using compared to gas because of the heat pump efficiency, it was very satisfying.
My friend was saying to me only yesterday, he said, look at my bill. I got my first bill, first bill in months. And he was really pleased. He was delighted to see that compared with previous bills he's had. And I think it sounds like a Moorish process. Thank you, Maddie. And over to Ben. What are your thoughts on the individual and their role in the future survival of our very planet?
If we're talking about carbon, I'd probably say the two things you should probably be doing that would make some impact is eat less meat and fly less, I guess, are probably the two big things. Aside from lobbying and voting for certain people, I guess, those are probably the carbon-based things. In terms of energy, it's a behaviour change versus the technology, right? Which one should we be doing? And my engineering mindset always goes for the technology. I always think if we're pushing things on people that are more expensive than they used to, or more inconvenient than they used to, or less convenient, I should say, than they used to, then the technology needs to be improved. And I think, aside from Maddie's point around the heat pumps, which is a very relevant one, EVs is another one. So I live on a terrace street opposite a school. So first of all, I'm lucky if I can park within half a mile of my house. And second of all, if I'm chasing cables across the pavements, That's not a great thing to do, I don't think, next to a school. So there are problems like that where I think the technology probably needs to get there. It needs to improve. But of course, I think we've got to remember that this is a relatively new thing. You know, we all had petrol cars and we all had gas-fired boilers 20 years ago. Heat pumps in electric vehicles weren't even a thing, and that's not long ago at all. So these things will all improve. You know, the electricity density of a battery will improve several fold over the next 10, 20 years. And that range anxiety will become addressed through the technology. Will improve our electrical infrastructure. So more houses will have, or pavements, for example, will have electrical posts to be able to charge your EV cars more conveniently. So we've just got to be conscious that we're at the beginning of the journeys of some of those technologies, and we just need to keep faith and not get that kind of fatigue of those technologies which are put in front of us, because they will get better.
Yes, exactly. I've spoken to people in the past who will go, oh, well, if I'm the only person doing it, what's the point? But I think you're absolutely right. You know, if we all overcome that fatigue and we all think the same thing and pull in the right direction, then we've got much more hope. Something I always think, and I'm sure I can't be the first person to think of this because, you know, I'm me and I'm not remotely scientific, but solar panels on the top of cars, quite literally a sunroof, that must have been thought of before. Is that a possibility? Anybody, any one of you three, is that something that could be achievable? Or is that a ridiculous idea?
I think it's a good idea. I just don't think you get much out of it. It'd be quite a small area to charge what is quite a large energy consumer in your battery in your car. Yeah, but why not? Why wouldn't you? The sun is always on your roof, right? So, and if you've got a battery in it, why wouldn't you have it?
So yeah, just an idea I thought I'd throw out there, just something that I ponder on every now and then. But there we go. That's my vision of the future. But now I'm going to move on to your visions of the future. So what does the future look like? In the 80s, Back to the Future promised us hoverboards, time travel, and the ageless optimism of Huey, Lewis, and the News, who believed that the only energy we truly needed was the power of love. But now the future is in the balance. How bad could it be if we do nothing? You know, just keep on powering the world with what we have right now and keep using fossil fuels. How bad could it really get, panel? I will go to Iwan first.
How bad could it get? We'll start going very, very, very hot, I guess, is how bad it will get. What is my fantasy of the energetic future? I mean, hey, I grew up watching Star Trek and things like that. I mean, I'm still waiting for my jetpack, being able to fly around everywhere. That's what I was promised as a kid watching TV. But seriously, I mean, I think that the energy future that I fantasize about is one where energy is largely generated locally, as little waste as possible, different kinds of solutions for different places, and crucially getting there in ways that aren't disruptive, to go back to that again, that don't require too much change, that seem achievable to anybody, to all individuals at any particular times. So different kinds of energy production, depending where you are, what works, what doesn't work, rather than an insistence on kind of global networks of power.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Iwan. And in a way, what you're saying is very much sort of tying into the idea of energy islands, which I think is something that Ben's been working on quite a lot. Now, Ben, to me, an energy island seems like a very vigorous version of Love Island. But could energy islands be the future from an engineering perspective? And just very broadly, what is your vision of our dream energy future?
I can't think of any parallels between Love Island and an energy island, but I guess it's kind of similar to the community idea of having a community or an area have independence over their energy. So they generate their own energy, they consume their own energy, and they can maybe trade their energy as well that they produce. So it's that idea of independence rather than reliance on your kind of traditional gas-powered or nuclear-powered power station. So in terms of the future, I guess, yeah, I still believe that the electrify everything answer is the right one. And I think that's where it will go. I mean, it's already cheaper to build a wind farm or a solar farm than it is to build another gas-fired power station. So in our kind of market that's driven by economics, I think it will drive itself. So I think that will happen. I guess the only other one that feels like a silver bullet out there is nuclear fusion, which we haven't really touched on. But I think current projections suggest it's not going to be practicable for another, 50, 100 years plus. So we'll definitely have to do something in the interim anyway. But that seems like the only one that maybe mimics a bit of science fiction, in that it seems to be able to produce more energy than you put into it. Not that I'm a nuclear physicist, but it seems to defy the laws of physics for me. But that's the only one that maybe seems like a science fiction technology that could potentially be a silver bullet in the future.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ben. That's a fascinating thought. And Maddie, same question to you. What is your dream future of energy use?
I think my dream would be where we've got the dominance from the renewable energy in general, kind of production of energy, and have that energy which is equitable by everyone. So we have got fair energy distribution and everybody can access that. I think in terms of dream for future, I'd like, as Ben said, the nuclear fusion to get somewhere. That might be the overall answer, that we've got unlimited access. But again, that's quite far in future. But I think the change that in overall our energy generation and distribution is my dream, to change that so it's available for everyone at affordable price and it's generated by majority of renewable sources.
Thank you, Maddie. That's a great answer. Thank you. So there we have it. There's that old joke, the punchline to which is, I've got the time if you've got the energy. It may feel like humanity is running out of time, but with the right kind of energy, could we turn the clocks back? There are industrious pioneers out there already and a glorious collective spirit in places like Barkham. And as we are rapidly learning on Sandbox, just 3 episodes in, the individual, that's you and me, dear listeners, has a huge role to play in all of this. And it's exciting to see that science fiction is becoming science fact. People once marvelled at Star Trek's Captain Kirk and his mobile communicator, not to mention his universal language translator, but now they're every day. And in his 1865 novel From the Earth to the Moon, Jules Verne anticipated solar power. So maybe those impossible futures are more possible than we sometimes dare to dream. We want you to join the conversation. So just use the hashtag BHSandbox on X, that's the artist formerly known as Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe to follow the show. You'll find Sandbox in all the usual places. And I would like to say a very big thank you to this month's panel. That's Professor Iwan Morus, as well as Buro Happold's very own Ben Jones and Maddie McTaggart. And thanks to you, as always, for listening. Goodbye for now.